Britain and the West have generally supported Israel for historical reasons. For one thing, the Jews who lived for hundreds of years in Britain and the West have integrated well with the society. One thing, they've contributed to society, and then Israel, when it's created, it became a democracy, can talk to the West in the same language, in the same mindset, and as you know, Israel probably is the only democracy in the Arab world. For example, they don't have a death penalty. All the Arab countries have a death penalty. They have rule of law. All the Arab world doesn't have rule of law. There's no democracy. There's a lot of dictatorship and authoritarian regimes. And these things have reflected greatly on us in the West. We are attached, we are influenced with what happened in the Arab world, was it in Palestine, in Iraq, in Egypt, in Libya, or in Syria. So I think that's how the West more or less feel closer and more comfortable in dealing with the Jews and Israel in general. I was yesterday in an event which was for the Jews and Israel, for example, was quite well organized. We very rare as Arabs, or if I want to extend it and say Muslims from the Middle East, can stage a similar event, because Muslims unfortunately are badly divided, stratified into the so-called good Muslim, bad Muslim, pseudo-Muslim, the false Muslim, educated Muslim, uneducated Muslim, Shia, Sunni, etc. And all these divisions have created these pockets of political Islam which plagued and endangered not just the religion, the concept of religion itself, it endangers the state of the Middle East, which you could see it is fragmenting day by day. A lot of people think the Middle East may be going into sort of balkanization, but that's totally untrue. The Middle East is going through fragmentation, like what you see in Libya today, what you see in Syria by ISIS and Daesh, what you see in Iraq, separation of Kurdish state from Iraq. So,
but sorry, isn't this division already stemmed by the West? Saying in the Middle East, like you mentioned the Sunnis, the Shia, there's this whole division in the Middle East. Isn't that already stemmed from the Western ideology? Isn't that their agenda?
I would say there is a written agenda for the West, because it's not in their interest to see the Middle East go into flame, because, as you know, Middle East is a source of energy for a lot of industrialized countries. And it's just bordering the Mediterranean, so it's right in the center of the world, and can influence Europe. Can influence Europe by, with the migrations, refugees, people who commit atrocities. You see the beheadings of Western journalists and so forth. So I think it's very complicated. The West have an interest in keeping the Middle East under its influence, yes, but in the same token, we don't have the proper elite and leadership to be able to propel the Middle East countries, the Arab countries, into some sort of, you could say, Southeast Asia country, India, Malaysia, China, or Thailand, where they advanced very well, and Japan. So I think the Middle East haven't got themselves to sort of understand the 21st century needs, the digital age needs. They're still fighting wars of the past, at least wars of words, because they're losing the battles all the time. And I think, from reading, as you know, I wrote a book about the Arab world, about Egypt in particular, called Egypt, the Youth Arab Spring. And in this book I explored the idea of the development of political Islam. I think the Arab world have to adapt to the new changes. They have to have a new order. There is countries in the world, particularly in the Middle East, which are not talking together. You're talking about Iran, Turkey, Israel, their countries have to be involved someday. I know there's some issues related to the Palestinian situation, but you're talking about a world of about 4.5 to 50 million people. And 450 million people have got a lot of things in common. They can resolve it to create what you could call it commonwealth, could create some form of political understanding to improve the standard of living of the people, to improve the stability of the region. Because if we stay as we have done over the last 70 years, the Middle East, if you cut it into segments or layers, you find every year come worse than the year before. I mean, this year we have ISIS. The year before we have Syria.
But isn't that the actual problem though? For example, in Palestine, it was able to build itself and kind of develop slightly further, of course, not in comparison to the West, but it was going there, it was getting there. However, in the war that took place over the summer, many bombs took place to the extent where everything was like put to the ground. The schools, the hospitals, the universities, everything was put to the ground. So how are they actually going to develop and become like the West, let's say?
Well, they'll never develop to be the West, because Gaza is not any different than any other country, neighboring country like Egypt or Jordan. So they are part of that fabric of society, so I can't see they have to have special treatment. What I can see, development of the Middle East country, the standard of living in Gaza is about 3 or 4 times that of Egyptians, or twice that of Jordanians. So, I mean, if you look at the tunnels, for example, building the tunnels costs something well over $3 billion. So, huge money and resources come to build or dig for tunnels. So, there's a huge economy for a city the size of 1.5 million, like an average city in Iran or in Egypt. So I think that's why I think we should look at the bigger picture rather than take bits and pieces off and focus on it, because that's what happened in the past. Arab dictators and totalitarian regimes have used all propaganda machinery to focus on one issue, which is Gaza. That was all really to reflect what the situation is. In Egypt, about 3 million people living in graveyards, for example. And nobody talk about it because the governments deflect any talking about it or visiting to these slums, which in millions, several millions, for example. And I'm sure you'll find in other Arab countries, but being an Egyptian, I can speak about Egypt. I'm sure you can find it in Yemen, you can find it in Sudan, people starving to this in Sudan. So that's why I think the Arab League has passed sell-by date. It has proved to be failure. It did not help. If you look at the Iraqi war, the Iraq situation, it has always been controlled by the West. The Western country decide the war and decide the peace. The Western country and the NATO decided the fate of Libya.
How can the Arabs actually take control of this though?
The Arab will take control if he's still to stop to be too argumentative, to be realist, and to let the real civil society and real educated and well-equipped people with knowledge and know-how to control
the
the
situation in Palestine. Why didn't they support them? And another question would be also with the situation of ISIS. How come they're not taking any action to stop them from what they're actually doing?
Well, I tell you, ISIS is a very powerful group and took big chunks of Iraq and Syria. And indeed, they control ports, they control oil, they sell oil in the open market, and they gain weaponry worth billions of pounds. So ISIS became a unique phenomenon in the Arab world, which is very dangerous, but it shows you how much vacuum is there. Why didn't we support that? You can say that if you got a democracy, if you got voice of the people heard for, the Arab world still ruled by authoritarian regime which decide what's a benefit for them rather than the people they rule. That's why the Arab world is divided and suffer from poverty and poor education, poor knowledge. There's a lot of information, television, newspapers, radios are censored and controlled in every direction. And I have studied that, and it's quite shocking actually. There is no freedom of expressing one's views about what happened in the Arab world if it does not, or if it disagree, if it does not disagree with a particular ruler or regime. They block you straight away. And of course in digital age, they are beaten by the young people, like in Egypt. The Arab Spring in Egypt started by the people, young people, who were working on the social media. They use the social media as their broadcasting centers. And they won over the cumbersome, huge bureaucracy of multi-billion television and the newspaper industry, because the other one was co-opted by the regimes. They became worthless to listen or to follow their opinion because they were politically directed and more or less used as a mouthpiece and propaganda for the regime. So they poisoned the people's minds, and where we got a very divided population. We got divided Arabs, we got divided Muslims in the Middle East. You must remember that Iran, although they speak a different language, for example, they use Arabic alphabet. The more or less Arabic in Iran is not far off an Arabic in Algeria. So it's in a way an Arabic country. Same apply to Turkey to some extent, although they use Latin alphabet over the last 70, 80 years. So that's why I think the Arab world is in a crisis. The Muslim world is in a crisis. We need a new school of thought, new ideas, as it happened 1,000 years ago. At the moment, there's deep divisions in the Arab world. We like to paper on it, but the cracks are too deep. It quickly gets exposed, and that's what we see. We see between the last wars, the last 25 years, the millions of Arabs, Iranians being killed, as you know, between Iraq-Iran war, and the Syrian uprising, hundreds of thousands being killed. In Egypt, thousands being killed. In Sudan, millions being killed. Sudan South, Sudan separated. And that's what was, Sudan in particular idea, it's an Arab country, but it's been neglected and been ignored. You never see anybody talk about Sudan. They probably talk about Gaza 20 times more than Sudan. That's what I mean, it's unfair world. You call it Islam, you call it humanity, you call it common sense, it does not exist. Oil. If you allow a huge tanker to come and stay all night and day filling with oil to go and sell it in the spot market, that means it's a good protection somewhere in the middle. If you can get billions and you can get this huge armaments going to ISIS, huge trucks and anti-air missiles, batteries, that's huge systems and infrastructure and hardware. So there is a problem. ISIS has got local support, and it's not in its own at all. There is some support. There's some people are opposing ISIS, of course, as well. A lot of people are opposing ISIS, but the political picture, the Arab League, for example, did not take any action. The Arab League is sitting as bystanders, watching. But if you look at United Nations, it's terrible. Its meetings, is raising its voice against what happened in the Middle East. But the Arab world is divided.
But David Cameron recently said that ISIS is also a threat to the West. And kind of, many people on social media started sending these messages that, we're going to be getting attacked very soon by Muslims and so on. Doesn't that actually create fear and worry in society instead of help society go on forward and develop?
Well, David Cameron have expressed his concern and condemnation, and rightly so, against ISIS. And I do condemn ISIS. I think they're a very sinister body. They will damage the Arab society and damage Islam.
But they have actually, and they are in that process of damaging Islam. But there
But
are
you
many.
don't see it this way.
Of course, they don't see it that way because they themselves believe they're doing something right in bringing their own laws and their own so-called Islamic rulings, as they put it, with the whole Khalifa. But the thing is, do we actually need a Khalifa in this day and age?
It's part of the total nonsense, and we never need a Khalifa in any age.